From a highly secure network of top secret locations across South Texas, this is a summer, not quite summer, according to the rules of the calendar, but it sure feels like summer outside. It's the summer edition of the Spurs Insider. I'm your host, Mike Finger, joined by our panel of Express News sports editor Nick Talbot, Spurs beat writer Jeff McDonald. Tom Orsborn is with us in spirit only. He's on vacation somewhere out in the scorching heat, maybe far from it. Who knows? But we have lots to talk about. Maybe we don't have a lot to talk about. We're going to give you a podcast anyway. We got the draft coming up. We've got NBA playoffs going on. Jeff McDonald, our All-NBA voter, can regale you with stories about his ballot. And I'm going to start there because that is the news that's occurred since we last spoke to the listeners on this podcast. All-NBA, all kinds of awards. Jeff McDonald with the huge honor and responsibility of choosing these victors. Jeff, what'd you think of the whole thing?
Well, I didn't choose Victor on all of them.
I see.
But on most of them I did. I think I'm looking forward to maybe a day where a podcast at this time of year isn't we're not talking about awards, we're talking about like playoffs and stuff. But for now, if we're going to do a Spurs podcast at the end of May, it's going to be mostly looking back at awards and looking ahead at draft stuff. So that's where we stand. Now, what was your question about victors?
Well, the victors on your ballots. Well, some of them were not Victor.
Let's talk about
what was your toughest decision. I'm gonna start like a real interviewer here, and treat you like a real guest, and give you the respect that guests deserve, and you might not deserve. What was your hardest decision on all these? You voted for everything except for what, executive of the year? That's chosen by other executives.
Other executives, yeah.
What was your toughest decision on all these all NBA, all defensive or individual awards? Jeff McDonald, the San Antonio Express News, who's a real legitimate journalist.
I mean, is this Frost Nixon? When you're talking about the main awards, I didn't really feel like there were a lot to sweat over. I mean, well, MVP was interesting, but to me, I don't really sweat it when it's something like that, because there were 3-4 like legitimate candidates for that award. So I voted for Jokic, but if someone wanted to vote for SGA or Luka Doncic, like I don't think that's horrendous, and I considered that as well. So a lot of people, when there's a lot of good choices, they worry about making the wrong one. I don't sweat it so much because I don't feel like there is a wrong choice. Like, you can make cases for all those guys. So I voted for Jokic there. I had Wemby on my defensive player of the year ballot, number one. Other people did too, but obviously he didn't win that ballot. Rudy Gobert did, and I have no problem with that. We discussed that all year long. Rudy's a multi-time winner, best defensive, the defensive centerpiece of one of the best defensive teams we've seen in a long time, and a big reason the once lowly Timberwolves got to where they are now. And then when you're talking about the other things Victor did win, all defense became a shoe-in when he was the runner-up for defensive player of the year. I don't think any of us were shocked when he made the all-rookie team. So that was an easy one. Did not have Victor Wembanyama on my all-NBA ballot. There are 15 slots there, and people tweeted at me angrily and said, how can you, he's one of the best 15 players in the NBA right now. And you're maybe not wrong. You're maybe not wrong to argue that. I don't know that the all-NBA team is really picked the very best 15 players, skill-wise, talent-wise, in the NBA. You're not a GM, drafting the top 15 players on your team. It has more to do with honoring the season. And that's one where I think when you're talking about honoring the season on an all-NBA or an MVP ballot, that's one where I think the team's success does have to be factored in. It has to. Like, defensive player of the year, okay. Rookie, like back when people were trying to argue Chet because OKC had a much better record than the Spurs. I thought that was ridiculous because the Rookie of the Year is not a team award, really. Most of the best rookies are going to go to bad teams. But when you're talking MVP or All NBA, it's my personal belief that you have to affect winning in some way to be considered for those awards on my ballot. I don't know that I can think of a scenario where I would put a player off a team that won 22 games on any of those ballots. Like, what would that guy have to do statistically to just overcome my, if you want to call it, bias against winning teams? Like Victor averaged 2010, led the league with 3.6 blocks, and that's really not good enough in my mind to overcome the 22-win Spurs, and so that's why he wasn't on my All-NBA ballot. I think he'll be a mainstay there once the Spurs at least get into like the play-in conversation. But for now, I think if you're an All-NBA player, if you're that good, you have to be good enough to affect winning in some way, and that's just my personal.
It's not like there was you brought this up many times over the years about how our old buddy Tim Duncan used to make All-NBA teams, especially towards the end of his career when his stat lines were not really impressive at all. He got the respect of a player on a team that wins with sort of middling by All-NBA standards stats. You look at this year's third team, I also noticed that even though these teams are positionless now, they sort of all three teams could be put on a court with guys kind of filling the traditional positions. There was a big guy on each team. There were forwards on each team. There were guards on each team. And so if you look at the third team, like Domantas Sabonis of the Kings made it. And that dude was on a team that won, and his stats are nothing to sniff at. In a lot of ways, it's pretty favorable compared to Victor Wembanyama. Like you can't just say, "Oh, Victor's clearly a better player this year than that guy." I mean, Sabonis was 19 points and 13 rebounds and 8 assists. Like that's not like some scrub got in over him. And this will all work itself out. And I've been on record over and over and over again for not caring about awards, and I still don't. But this is just my way of saying it's not an outrage. Like no one should be offended by this.
Yeah.
And I don't think Victor's offended by this. And if you're a Spurs fan, if Victor is offended by this, then that's a good thing, because when Victor gets worked up over something, that usually works out well on the court for Victor. Like, I think it's going to be one of the best things that could have happened is him not winning Defensive Player of the Year, him not being NBA, All NBA, third team, because that's just going to make him want it even more. And I guess I can leave that at that.
Yeah, when I'm filling out those All NBA ballots, I'm not necessarily going like, I need to find a spot for this guy, or find a spot for that guy. I mean, usually the top 5 are pretty clear cut, especially now that it's going to be the first 5 guys on your MVP ballot. But the second and third teams, you're almost looking like, oh man, the Kings need a guy. Like they had the type of season that they need a guy, and the Timberwolves need a guy, and Boston needs a guy. Boston probably didn't have enough guys on the team. If people want to quibble with that approach a little bit, I mean, everybody on all 15 guys played for teams that won at least 46 games, and all 15 guys played on teams that at least were in the play-in. They were playing past the end of the regular season. If people want to argue, quibble with that approach, 2 guys apiece off Western Conference play-in teams, you could make an argument against that. Like, did the Lakers need 2 guys? Maybe not.
They need LeBron.
Which one are you going to? Which one are you going to leave off? Did the Suns need 2 guys? If not, which one are you going to leave off? And that becomes a different issue in of itself. Which one of those guys are you going to leave off?
Again, guys who had great years though.
Yeah, the last guy on the list that made it was Devin Booker. And do you think Victor Wembanyama is at this point in his career is better than Devin Booker?
Every Spurs fan that tweeted me does.
Wow.
That's
all I say.
It's making me afraid to go out in public.
It's sort of apples and oranges. Like, I don't know.
If I was drafting
It's
right now, I'd rather have Victor. But if I
of
was
course,
drafting-
of course. 30 GMs out of 30 take Victor Wembanyama over Devin Booker right now because like of what's coming next.
but if you get one game 7, you want to win.
Since we have
Probably
no obvious agenda today, let's just make this a thought experiment. If you could have put Victor Wembanyama as a 19-year-old, the exact Victor Wembanyama that played for the Spurs this year, on the Phoenix Suns, and this isn't totally fair because there's different positions and they might have constructed their roster differently, blah blah blah. But let's just go for it. If you would have put Victor Wembanyama on this year's Suns and taken Devin Booker off, how does that change the Phoenix Suns season? Did they do better? Did they do worse? Did they do about the same?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't do this game. I'm bad at
that's pretty tough. I think they're probably maybe worse. I just think as when you're a rookie, your basketball IQ is growing over time, and you're learning how these things, how to win and where people are on the court. And Devin already knows those things. Kevin Durant already knows those things. Now, if you could trade him out for Bradley Beal, but that's not the experiment, right?
Right.
And I think at this point in his career, Devin Booker, with his experience, probably knows more of what he's supposed to do than Victor, and that leads to more winning.
I think it's really
like if you have a team of all the great rookies, like you're probably not going to win that many games, and we saw that with Victor. Like they didn't win the Spurs didn't win any more games than the year before, despite adding maybe with the greatest piece they've ever added, and that's saying a lot because they've added some. There's Tim and David there, right? So, yeah, I think if you get one game to win, I would probably choose Devin. I mean,
see, that's not the question that I asked. It's a different question, and I'm not sure. Though I'm not asking about one game. One game, I'd almost pick. One game now, I'd pick Victor at the end of Victor's rookie year. One game early in the season, I would have taken Devin Booker because Victor.
We're talking about the entire. Yours about the entire season.
Yes, because the purpose of the thought experiment is who more deserved a spot on the All-NBA, who had a better season.
Well,
who had a better season.
I think that holds over the course of a season. I still think you win more games with Devin Booker at this point for the same reasons I listed.
I think it would be. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not agreeing. I think it would be close because I'm the one who posed this question, and now I'm thinking about it, and I don't think it changes the end result for the Phoenix Suns. I think they probably win about the same number of games. I could be convinced either way, whether it's more or less. I think they probably end up right where they did in the play-in area and a first-round exit. But the point here is to come full circle on the All-NBA stuff is that's not the fact that we're talking about it and not coming to an automatic, no doubt conclusion that Victor would have been better or worse than the last player selected to the All-NBA third team means that it's not an outrage. Like the putting Devin Booker on that third team is totally defensible. And I think if you would have had Victor on there, I don't think anyone would be up in arms about that either. So another edition of the Spurs Insider podcast where we come up with the scorching hot take conclusion that it's fine.
Everything's fine. But what if you had swapped Devin Booker with Mamu? There's a thought experiment.
Man. So if Mamu could have played for the Suns all year, they might still be playing in June.
Yeah. And would the Spurs be better or worse?
Oh, they'd be worse. That'd be much worse. Devin Booker for Mamu? Yeah.
The point you made, just to reiterate, there were so many years where it's like the Spurs statistically, if you're just going by the best stats, if it's all stat based individually, they didn't have a guy that should have been on the all NBA team. How can you put Tim Duncan on averaging 13 and 8 when there's, XYZ averaging 20 and 10? But the winning approach worked in the Spurs' favor then because everyone was looking about, well, the Spurs won 60 games. How do we reward the Spurs? They deserve a player on there. Who's it going to be? And Tim got there a lot of years that way. And so when the shoe's on the other foot, and it's like, well, we got this guy with the big stats, but 20 wins, but he should still get on because stats. Like you're kind of trying to play both sides of the field there, and that you got to be consistent. That's always been my motto.
That's been your motto?
Yeah, I have it on T-shirts, coffee mugs. You gotta be
consistent.
It's real catchy, It's probably gonna be like the words on my deathbed in a couple years.
Do you pass it along to your children?
Oh yeah.
You got to be consistent.
Like when that kid comes home with straight C's, got to be consistent, Dad. Straight C. No B's or A's in the bunch.
That's good. Good
parenting, right?
Yeah, I think you live up to that credo. You are always who you are. I'll tell you that. Something else that came up. I'm not sure if it was since we've last spoken to the listeners, but we got the definite this offseason that we've known about since January, that your Spurs are going to go to France next January, and I think, Jeff, you're probably gonna make that trip, and I'm segueing into the draft, but like you could be covering 3 French dudes for your Spurs. Like there's a lot of French guys in this draft. And like, are you ready for? Are you
three of them will probably be lottery picks, right? 2 for sure.
Yeah, and the Spurs have 2 lottery picks. I doubt they take 2 French guys, but they could take one French guy,
just to make the other French guy happy, like the French guy. And
then we could, instead of 4 French journalists this year, we might have 8, because you need 4 for each French guy. So we could be, Michael C. Wright, friend of the podcast, had a great tweet the other day about there was the census had reported that San Antonio's population grew as much as any city in the state or the country or what have you. And Michael C. Wright said, "Yeah, that was just the French journalists." We hope all those guys are doing well this offseason.
You want to name the French prospects?
I'll let you
pronounce them.
Well, there's one that I really want, and this made me think about John Malkovich in a way. This is getting really esoteric, but there's a guy called Tidjane Salaam, and I might be butchering that, but it reminds me of Rashaan Salaam, the great, no longer with us, running back for the Colorado Buffaloes, who was around, I think, when you were in college, and when I was in college.
When I was in college, just me.
Yeah. He had that's the game when John Malkovich of the Texas Longhorns suffered a concussion on the sideline because he got hit. But anyway, Tidjane Salaam is rising up the draft boards due to his play in the playoffs over there in Europe. And he's not even the top 1 or 2 guys that people talk about. There's Alex Sarr, and then there's Zachary Risache. I'm going to enjoy saying these names.
I was going to say, I think that's the one I want them to draft, just because it would be the most fun to say.
He does have the most fun name to say. Once you learn how to say it, it's pretty.
Risache, I think that's right.
Bill Schoening's going to love it.
Yeah. Well, when the new Rodeo Road Trip theme song that he writes every year he's gonna need to come up with some good rhymes for Risache.
Oh, you could probably get sachet in there somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, any of those guys jump out at you, or in all your draft study that you've been doing lately?
So Alex Sarr, have we decided he's going to be the number 1 pick? He seems to be the consensus, at least. I wouldn't say unanimous, but consensus.
The unpredictable Atlanta Hawks. Who knows what they're going to do? But yeah. And he's probably the least likely of the 3 to be a San Antonio Spur. I'd say that.
Right. For reasons that you don't think he'll fall to 4th, or you don't think they'll take him even if he does.
Oh, I think for reasons he won't fall to 4th.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I back when the Spurs had a chance at the number 1 pick, and everyone thought Sarr was going to be the number 1 pick. You wondered about the fit.
Right.
I mean, yeah, he's a great, big, long, tall, defensive guy, but the offensive skills aren't. Let's say they're not Wemby-esque yet on that guy, and when you have another guy that basically can't score in your starting lineup or playing with Wemby, because the Spurs have too many of those guys.
Yeah,
guys that can't shoot. Like they need to go get guys that can shoot. That would be if I had any advice for Brian Wright going into the draft and free agency, the guys that can make the ball go into the basket. Those guys. Like look at those guys.
Reed Shepherd?
Look at those guys. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is everybody in this draft is going to have flaws because it's not really as we've spoken about before, it's not a super deep, awesome draft. So you're going to be able to talk yourself out of everybody. But I would lean towards shooting in this draft as much as possible. Stop the presses. And then point guards, but we're getting away from the French people. But like everyone,
it was just a transition. You could just talk about the draft. Talk about anything you want about the draft.
This is such a free flowing interview. Talk about whatever I want to talk about, huh?
Yeah,
interesting. I'm watching some good shows on Netflix. What was I saying? Point guard. People want point guards, and a lot of buzz about the Connecticut kid, Stefan Castle.
Is he a point guard?
Is he a point guard? And can he shoot? Oh, but we could just teach him to shoot. That seems to and
how'd that work with Jeremy Sohan?
I was gonna say. I mean that I'm not 100% against that idea. In theory, but it can't be every draft pick. Like you have to.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have some guys that just come already able to make the basketball go in the basket. And I'm not arguing against Castle either. By the way, I'm just saying that's one of the knocks on him. And when I hear people say, "We'll just teach him how to shoot," I think, yeah, but you're already trying to start Jeremy Sohan, Trey Jones. The whole reason you're looking for a point guard is because your point guard can't shoot threes.
Here's the dilemma with this draft with this team. And I'll use, like, you mentioned the Sarr thing and why he wouldn't come to the Spurs, and is it because he won't fall to them or because they won't take him? There's almost no scenario where Sarr is perfect for the Spurs, right? Because if they would have won the number one pick, they probably wouldn't have taken him because he isn't a perfect fit. And he's almost like a guy where if they're only going to take him at a spot where he wouldn't fall to them at. like they'll take the best player available. I think that's the strategy. I think that should be the strategy. But then there's tiebreakers. Like, is he exactly the position, the skill set fit that we need? And I think that's sort of true for all these guys. Like Stefan Castle, I enjoyed watching him in the NCAA tournament. He's a winner, obviously. He played really well, might have been the best player on the floor at times for the team that won the national championship, and you could sort of squint and see him do the same type of things for a Spurs team at some point. But then I guess I'm taking a long way to say you put these guys in pools where here are three guys that are about the same. What are the tiebreakers? What's the best fit? The strike against Castle is he's not necessarily a pure point guard, which is what you'd like him to play, and he's not necessarily a great shooter. But to your point, all these guys you're going to be able to find a strike against all these guys, no matter who you're talking about. Klingon, the big center for UConn, like clearly a top 5 type talent. And then you say, okay, if he's available for the Spurs, do you miss the chance to put him next to Victor and just make the paint like a no-fly zone for the next 10 years for the Spurs? And then you say, well, that'd be great, but then that's another guy who can't shoot. This was the problem that the Spurs had last year when they played Victor with Zach Collins. That didn't work great, and it worked a lot better when Victor played center. Do you want to screw that up? Everything comes with an asterisk. And so this is a podcast where I'm not sure we're going to have a final verdict or a true hot take as to who they should take. Like all these guys, the Kentucky guards, there's reasons to take both of them. And then there's they're small. You wonder about the defense. You wonder about uh, like Tom mentioned on the last podcast, can Dillingham guard anybody? I don't know. Shepard's not huge. Dillingham's not huge. I'm just not going to be able to come up with a verdict here as to who the Spurs should target with either of these picks. But I'll open it to the floor.
Well, I don't have that either, but I think you're making an argument as we're talking it out for taking the best player available and not worrying so much about fit and just figure it out later. If that means, oh, we have too many non-shooters now, we got to trade somebody. We got to trade Jeremy Sohan or no, geez, I don't want to like put that on the universe or have people think I'm saying that's going to happen. But I'm just saying if you have a glut of non-shooters and you feel like, oh, well, now we just need to trade one of those guys for something or let one of them go. Like if there's no clear-cut guy to take, I think just taking the clearest talent and not worrying about if the argument against a guy is only fit, then I think you go for talent and figure out the fit later. Even if you have too much of one thing or too little of another, you just make it work. In a draft like this, where there's no clear-cut answers.
And having two picks helps in the scenario as well, because you're going to have one of those guys may not fit. I mean, one of those guys may not fit as well, and you get one point guard and one guy that just is talent.
I'd just be tempted to take one guy who can shoot right now, and if that's the only thing they can do, if it's basically Steve Kerr, like take that guy with one of those picks.
Is that like Reed Shepard's floor?
Something like that, or also the kid from Tennessee,
Dalton Connect.
Would be a guy I would look at in that situation.
And the NCAA tournament, is one of the last places in basketball and big time basketball where the media still sits courtside. Like that there's like 3 places in the NBA where we still have courtside seats. It's like Dallas and Memphis, and where else? The staples are kind of at the end. Regular season college basketball, they've moved us up to the rafters, but in the NCAA tournament, you still sit courtside. And I was watching that Texas-Tennessee game. Where was that tournament? Charlotte, I think. And just struck by how huge Tennessee was as a team. And that Connect is a big guy too. Like he's a big dude. And I'm not sure, like he's sort of lumbering in a way. And I'm not sure how that's going to translate, but if you just get him as a guy just to make shots, like you said, and not worry about the fact that he does look sort of lumbering and might not be able to keep up with whatever types of wings that he might be asked to guard, like that might be fine. And again, I'm not pushing for that either, but
going forward,
going
forward, the team with Victor Wembanyama on it is going to be able to create boatloads of open threes. So having guys that can make those open threes would be pretty good thing to have. And the Spurs really didn't have it this year. Do you know who their leading 3-point shooter is percentage-wise this year? Cedi Osman was their best 3-point shooter, and he might not even be on the team next year.
Yeah.
After they traded McDermott, Osman led them in 3-point percentage. I think it was like 38. Like they didn't even have one guy get to 40, which is kind of crazy in the modern NBA. So they got to upgrade that spot almost over anything.
Cedi Osman, actually, this might be, I'm no scout, but he's not, he like the Dalton Connect comp there he could fill that type of role. Like I'm not sure that'd be a terrible thing if you get the next Cedi Osman type, a bigger guy who can not necessarily be expected to be a defensive stopper or even that much of a creator, but just a guy who can rebound a little bit. But just to set expectations for Spurs fans, with a top 10 pick, you're hoping the Spurs will land the next Cedi Osman. I think that's not a terrible scenario, especially with like number 8. Like go back to the top 10s for the past.
Where did
10
the original?
Years.
Where was the original?
How many people?
Where was the original Cedi Osman drafted?
Ooh, I can look that up.
I think it was 50-something, 40-something.
But my point is, go back to the top 10 picks over the past 10 years. Do you think that Cedi Osman is in the upper 50 percentile of top 10 picks? I think he is. There's a lot of top 10 picks that ended up having worse careers than Cedi Osman.
Let's look at the number 8 pick in Cedi Osman's draft. Stanley Johnson to the Detroit Pistons.
Former Spur.
There you go. There you go.
What if you got the next Stanley Johnson at
Number
8?
4 pick was Porzingis, but he went 31st overall.
Yeah.
Said he went.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that.
Checking out.
I'm looking at that draft too. The Cedi Osman draft, where he went with the first pick of the second round. He was picked 31. Okay. In the top 10 of that draft, you have Cat, you have D'Angelo Russell, you have Porzingis, who were all-stars. Okay. The rest of the top 10, Jahlil Okafor, 3rd overall. Mario Hezonja, 5th overall. Willie Cauley-Stein, Emmanuel Mudiay, Stanley Johnson, Frank Kaminsky, Justice Winslow. That's the rest of your top 10. Osman, if he would have been taken in the top 4, in the top 10 of that draft, he would have been the 4th best player. Like, I think this is a great discussion to have. Like, also in that draft, interesting, Miles Turner and Devin Booker went in the second 10. And those
team.
I hear
so what my point is, when you hear about the Spurs having 2 top 10 picks, I think the excitement, the understandable excitement about that is, hey, we could get 2 future all-stars if we're the Spurs, because we have 2 lottery picks. The truth is, even in the top 10, more top 10 picks sort of bust out and become not necessarily failures, but non-stars, then become stars. And if you could be assured of getting a guy who has Cedi Osman's career at 8, I think you take it.
Yeah. The next year, 4 and 8, Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris.
Another former Spur, Marquise Chris.
There you go.
So yeah,
you could just keep going down the line. Next year, Josh Jackson, Frank. I don't even know I can't say his name. Nick Talbot.
Oh yeah.
How do you say his name for the next? I don't even know how to say his name. It's been. I mean, that's.
Well, the joke was Frankie Siggs. Was it Frankie? The joke is the nicotine thing, and the Knicks fans called him. I'm missing the joke here, and some listeners are yelling.
Oh, they've tuned out hours ago.
Okay. Anyway, but yeah, he had like a brief peak, and wasn't much.
But what you're saying is, the Spurs have number 4, number 8, and it would be great to nail, if not 2 all-stars, at least one future all-star.
Right.
But if you end up with 2 solid contributors at those spots, you're going to be okay with that. Spurs fans should be okay with that. I'm
not telling the Spurs fans what they should be okay with. Hope is a good thing, as Andy Dufresne said, and it's great to hope that you can get Victor Wembanyama's longtime, forever sidekick, Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan, whatever. And that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for that second superstar, and maybe you get that guy. I'm saying if they don't get that guy, but if they end up with 2 guys who play 10 years in the league, like rotation minutes for playoff teams, that's a win. And I'm not telling the Spurs fans they have to be happy with that, but from a organizational scouting standpoint, that's a win. And that's a like upper percentile type outcome here.
The takes on this podcast are just scorching.
Odds are with 2 picks in the top 10 at 4 and 8, as Nick has just spelled out, looking back to these old drafts, that at least one of them is going to be completely forgettable, and that might not play much at all, and will fizzle out after his rookie deal and become a journeyman, what have you. Like, that's the Debbie Downer part of this. You hope that both of the picks don't turn out that way. And I might also add that they have these 2 picks in a draft that scouts seem to agree is not one of the better drafts of the past decade. So that also tempers expectations.
It would be nice for them to show they can hit a home run at 4-8. Like they've been really good drafting 29th, and they've been
I agree.
They've been really good at drafting first.
I agree.
But if they can, find that sweet spot in the middle, that would that would be super.
This is the other question that the everybody in the Spurs organization is probably fighting over. That's fascinating to me too. Is you mentioned earlier, you obviously take the best guy. Well, in the Spurs room, in their organization, they have lots and lots and lots of opinions from smart people, from scouts, from people who watch this stuff year round. And there might be a huge disagreement about who just the best guy is. So, I mean, there are a lot of people weighing in on this. And so it's not just as simple as taking the best guy overall. But let's just, one last thought experiment before we go. Let's use Dalton Connect. And I'm not even saying for sure that this is the case with Dalton Connect. But for the sake of argument, we've decided as the Spurs organization, everyone in this room, from Dave Telep to the college scouts to Brian Wright to R.C. Buford, they've pegged Dalton Connect as a guy with like a 75% chance to become Cedi Osman, to become that kind of guy, okay? And then you have one of the French guys with that same number 8 pick, and you decide he has a 10% chance to become an all-NBA player at some point. Name your guy, like Jaylen Brown, something like that. What's your pick there? The 75% chance Cedi Osman, or the 10% Jaylen Brown, who with a 50% chance of becoming nothing? You understand the question?
I understand the question. I mean, I have to think about it because I don't know.
All these thought experiments this week. All right, so this is just with one of the picks, and then the other.
This is what you've already taken your 4th pick. You've already made your 4th.
Who did I take it for?
See, that's the other question.
That's kind of the answer.
You can't do this in a vacuum. Maybe the answer is you take one of the high floor, low ceiling guys. You use your 8 for a high floor, low ceiling. You use your 4 for the high ceiling, low floor guy. But anyway, no. But that is probably
the answer, Mike.
Okay, but forget about 4. Forget about 4. We're going to do this in a vacuum, which is unfair. The 4 does not matter at all. You can't know what's in the 4 box. The 4 is what is it? Schrodinger's cat. You can't know what's in the 4 box. In the 8 box, you have the 75% Cedi Osman career on one hand, and the 10% Jaylen Brown, 60% nothing. Which one do you pick?
I think I go Jaylen Brown just because they already have Wemby, and you're just kind of searching for that second guy.
That's totally understandable take.
I think I take the big swing too.
Take the big swing?
Yeah.
I don't disagree. But again, this pick won't be made in a vacuum. They will know what was in the 4 box. They will know what they plan to do in free agency, and all that plays into it. But it's fun to think about, and we'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks. And until then, hey, you take your big swings every day. Sometimes you got to go with the high floor. Sometimes you got to go into your day just thinking we're going to make the best of this, knowing it's not going to be the best day of your entire life, but it could.
But you got to be consistent.
It could just decent. It could be decent. See, you just violated your own motto, by the way, by taking the big swing. Like you just said at the beginning of this podcast, you got to be consistent. That's on the T-shirts. You tell your kids this with their C grades, and then you go out and you take a big swing, knowing that it could blow up in your face.
That doesn't have anything to do with consistency.
I guess you could say you. So you're saying you always take the big swing every day?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's absolutely not true. But if the listeners want to go out there for the next 2 weeks until we talk to them again, take your big swings every day. We'll be rooting for you. Until then, take care of each other and keep it real.